Jonathan was a dedicated man, tirelessly committed to his job. He worked long hours as a software engineer in the bustling city of Greenville. His house, however, was miles away from the urban hubbub, nestled in the serene countryside that lay just beyond the outskirts of the town. The seclusion suited him perfectly, providing solace after exhausting workdays. One fateful evening, Jonathan was driving home on a dimly lit road after another grueling day at the office. The dense woods flanked the sides of the road, their shadows playing eerie tricks on the mind as his car's headlights sliced through the darkness. The night was overcast, the moon and stars hidden behind heavy clouds, casting the surroundings into an abyss of inky black. As he drove, the only sound was the low hum of his engine. The isolation of the woods was eerie, but it was also something he had grown accustomed to, enjoying the solitude after the hustle and bustle of the city. About a mile from his house, as he rounded a curve in the road, Jonathan's heart leaped into his throat. A figure stumbled out of the woods and into the middle of the road, bathed in an otherworldly, ghastly glow from his headlights. She was a woman, and her entire body was covered in blood. Her face contorted in agony, she let out a heart-wrenching scream that pierced the silence of the night. In a panic, Jonathan swerved to avoid her, the tires screeching in protest, and his heart pounded in his chest as he passed her, but his conscience got the better of him. He couldn't leave her there, injured and alone in the middle of nowhere. Jonathan hit the brakes and brought his car to a halt. He flung open his car door, the night air chilling him to the bone. The woman staggered toward him, blood-soaked and disheveled, her eyes pleading for help. As she neared, her voice quivered with terror, and she stammered, "Please, you have to help me. He's coming. He's going to kill me." Jonathan's heart raced, and his instincts kicked in. Without a second thought, he rushed to her side, helping her into the car, his mind racing to comprehend the situation. He could see the fear etched on her face, and the urgency of the moment weighed heavily on him. She explained that her boyfriend had brutally beaten her and was now chasing her into the woods, his rage fueled by some unknown torment. With trembling hands, Jonathan fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. He explained the dire situation to the dispatcher, and she assured him that the police would be dispatched immediately. Trembling with fear, he informed them of his location, the isolated road in the middle of the woods, and the gravely injured woman he had just rescued. Jonathan's voice quivered as he spoke with the dispatcher. "Please hurry. There's no way I can wait here on the side of the road for him to arrive." The dispatcher assured him they would meet him at the hospital, which was the safest option given the circumstances. The police would take it from there. The drive to the hospital was agonizing, as Jonathan sped through the winding roads, glancing nervously in his rearview mirror. He was haunted by the thought of the enraged boyfriend catching up to them, his mind playing out the horrors that could unfold. The woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, clung to Jonathan, her sobs of relief and fear intermingling in the car's confined space. As they arrived at the hospital, a sense of relief washed over Jonathan. He pulled into the emergency bay, and the police were already there, waiting for them. They rushed to Sarah's aid, ensuring her safety and promising her that they would handle the situation with her boyfriend. She clung to the officers, recounting the horrifying events that had transpired. Jonathan watched as they led Sarah into the hospital, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, and a newfound respect for the unpredictable twists life could take. He had unwittingly become a guardian angel for a terrified stranger in need, and it had forever changed the trajectory of his life. As the authorities took control of the situation and the hospital staff tended to Sarah's injuries, Jonathan sat in the waiting area, his mind racing with thoughts of the night's events. He couldn't help but wonder about the untold stories of those who crossed his path, the secrets hidden beneath the surface of their lives. The hours dragged on, and he was eventually approached by an officer who commended his quick thinking and bravery. They assured him that Sarah was in good hands and that her boyfriend had been apprehended. Jonathan, exhausted and overwhelmed, returned home in the early hours of the morning. In the days that followed, he couldn't shake the surreal experience from his mind. The woods that had once been a source of solace now held a sinister edge. The isolation he had cherished was now a haunting reminder of the darkness that could lurk. In the shadows, Jonathan couldn't help but think about the woman, Sarah, and the traumatic ordeal she had endured. Their paths had crossed in the most unexpected of ways, leaving an indelible mark on his life. he found himself re-evaluating his own existence, recognizing the power of a single decision and the profound impact it could have on the lives of others. As Jonathan looked out at the woods from his window, he knew that he would never see them in the same light again. The isolation was no longer comforting, it was a reminder of the knight he had become, a reluctant hero, forever connected to a woman named Sarah and the life-altering events that had transpired on a desolate road in the middle of nowhere. In the sleepy town of Oak Ridge, nestled deep in the sprawling forests of the Pacific Northwest, life seemed as serene as the slow-flowing river running through the heart of the village. Oak Ridge was a place where neighbors knew each other, where children played in the streets, and where the only source of excitement was usually the occasional summer festival. In this quiet town, Anthony Davenport found his refuge from the chaos of the outside world. A former Marine, Anthony settled in Oak Ridge, hoping to escape the memories of service and the gloom that haunted him at home. Here he found solace in the quiet rhythm of life, and his days were often spent wandering the forest trails and thinking. One cool autumn afternoon, Anthony decided to take a leisurely drive along the winding, tree-lined roads leading to the center of town. The sun softly illuminated the foliage, and the rustling of the leaves hummed a soothing tune. The hum of a motor accompanied him soothingly. At a bend, a sight caught his eye that broke the tranquility of the day. In the distance he saw a car parked in the middle of the road, and beside it two figures prostrate on the ground. Anthony's gut clenched with alarm, a feeling he had learned to trust during his time in the Marines. Slowing down, Anthony squinted to get a better look at the car. The two figures on the ground hadn't moved, and the whole thing looked suspiciously odd. Instinct and training told him something was wrong, but his mind was spinning with a decision stop to help or drive on by. He decided to go around this car and glanced in the rearview mirror to reassess the situation. What he saw sent shivers down his spine. The two men on the ground suddenly jumped to their feet, their movements quick and coordinated. Rising up, Anthony saw several more figures emerge from the thick bushes on either side of the road. As many as 10 men, their faces hidden by hoods and masks, were approaching the car. A cold dread settled in Anthony's chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. He had narrowly escaped a trap that appeared to have been set to lure the unsuspecting Good Samaritans into some nefarious purpose. Fear pinched his heart, and he realized his intuition was right. Swallowing hard, Anthony decided not to stop. His instincts and military training told him to drive away from this dangerous situation. He pressed the gas pedal, and the car sped forward. The figures in the rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller as he moved away from the ominous scene, leaving the road behind. As he drove, thoughts raced through his mind. What had he managed to avoid? Who were these people and what were they up to? He couldn't shake the feeling of dread, and the image of a figure emerging from the bushes haunted him. Anthony's heart pounded with the weight of the unknown, with questions that had no answers. When he finally returned home, he couldn't hold the horrific experience inside him. He shared the story with his close friends in Oak Ridge, and they were all equally shocked by the discovery. They began piecing together stories from other locals about suspicious encounters, strange disappearances, and unexplained events that had been happening in the neighborhood for months. It became clear that the trap from which he had narrowly escaped was not an isolated incident. The town of Oak Ridge had been targeted by a group of criminals who used these sinister tactics to lure potential victims, often for the purpose of robbery, and in some cases for much more serious purposes. In the end, Anthony's intuition and quick thinking saved him from a terrible fate. Jacob had just finished another long night of work at the local newspaper. He was in charge of layout, so he often had to stay up late into the night to get the paper ready for the morning mailing. Living in the countryside, he was quiet and secluded, quietly traveling 40 kilometers from the bustling city. It was well past midnight when he left the newsroom, and the night was shrouded in serene darkness. The winding country roads were dimly lit by the headlights of his car, casting eerie shadows on the trees and bushes that lined the road. Jacob was tired and anxious to get home, anticipating the simple pleasure of a quiet night's rest. As soon as he turned one of the steep curves in the road, an inexplicable chill ran through his body. The temperature seemed to plummet, and he shuddered despite the warmth of the car's interior. At first he attributed it to fatigue and the eerie silence of the night, but the sensation soon turned into something much more disturbing. A subtle but undeniable sensation swept over him, as if something in the back seat was stirring. Jacob's heart raced, but he kept his eyes on the road. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror for fear of what he might see, but the feeling never left him, and he couldn't shake the thought that someone was lurking behind him. The car, once a familiar and reliable companion, now behaved strangely, as if there was extra weight in the back seat. The steering felt the presence of a passenger he couldn't see but could feel. The uneasy feeling that there was another person in the car, an uninvited passenger casting an invisible shadow, lingered in Jacob's mind throughout the trip. Jacob's thoughts raced, his imagination picturing all sorts of disturbing scenarios. Finally, as he pulled up to his house, the feeling of an unseen presence reached its climax. A few hundred yards from his house, he had to slow down as he approached a one-lane bridge. Next to the driveway leading to the bridge was a creepy, dilapidated house. As soon as he drove up to it, the unsettling sensation of another person in the car disappeared, leaving him in a state of bewildered relief. Jacob pulled up to his house, parked the car in the driveway, and rushed inside, closing the doors behind him. He couldn't explain what had happened, but the feeling of someone else being in his car was so vivid that he couldn't shake it off. He spent a restless night trying to convince himself that it was just fatigue playing out. The next evening Jacob returned to work, still haunted by the unexplained events of the previous night. Unable to concentrate on his work, he decided to dig through the newspaper's archives. He knew that old newspapers often published stories about local tragedies and wondered if there was a connection to what had happened to him here. As he looked through the records, his heart skipped a beat when he came across a death notice from a few years earlier. The notice indicated that someone had tragically died on the very corner where he had felt a chilling presence in his car. It was dated the very day of the gruesome encounter. Suddenly it all made sense. The presence he felt could be the lingering spirit of the man who had died in that tragic incident. It was as if that restless soul had longed to go home and, for reasons unknown to Jacob, had chosen him to be his temporary companion that fateful night. Jacob couldn't help but feel mixed emotions: awe, fear, and sympathy for the lost soul. He couldn't explain the inexplicable, but one thing was certain: the road home from work would never be the same for him. Paul has always been an adventurer, and his latest journey from West Texas to Tennessee was no exception. He was determined to explore the scenic countryside and discover the hidden gems encountered along the way. As his trusted companion, I was chosen to share a late shift with him on the long road trip. Our adventure began under the vast Texas sky as the sun was setting on the horizon. The miles melted under our feet as Paul told me about his past trips and interesting encounters. With each mile, I was getting more and more interested. Somewhere around 2 in the morning we found ourselves on I-30 in Arkansas, on a seemingly endless highway. Tall trees on both sides of the road created a canopy that cast eerie shadows across our path, and their branches grazed the roof of our car. The loneliness of the road at this late hour was surreal, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind in the tree crowns. As we drove deeper into this desolate landscape, fatigue began to creep up on us. The constant hum of the road and the rhythmic flashing of the yellow dividing lines began to put me to sleep. I fought to stay awake, knowing that my co-pilot, Paul, was depending on me. And then out of the corner of my eye I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. On the side of the road, partially hidden by thick shrubbery, stood a man. His clothes were tattered, his hair disheveled and unkempt. A disheveled beard was visible in the dim moonlight, and a sense of weariness and hopelessness was written all over his face. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a hallucination brought on by fatigue, but he was still there, a lone figure in the darkness. My heart raced, and I hesitated to speak, thinking it was a trick of the imagination. I muttered what the, under my breath, not wanting to disturb Paul. To my surprise, Paul immediately replied, "Did you see that guy too?" His voice trembled, and I sensed the concern in his tone. I nodded in response, not knowing if we should stop. Paul began to slow down, headlights casting an eerie light on a man standing on the side of the road. As we pulled up, the man looked up, his eyes reflecting fear and relief. Paul stopped the car a safe distance from the man and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he asked. The man hesitated for a moment, then replied in a shaky voice, "I don't remember how I got here." Paul exchanged a concerned look with me, then offered the man a ride. It was a risky decision, but the thought of leaving someone in the middle of nowhere didn't appeal to us. The man gratefully accepted the offer and climbed into the back seat. As he told us, his name was Sam, and he has absolutely no understanding or memory of how he ended up on the highway at night. He refused to answer any of our other questions. The only thing he did explain was where his house was. We gave him a ride, at our own risk. Sam was constantly looking over his shoulder and often fiddling with something. Paul and I exchanged glances, realizing that this encounter was turning into something much more mysterious than we had anticipated. We drove in silence for a while, and with every kilometer the atmosphere became more and more tense. The eerie road, the dense trees, and our mysterious passenger seemed to conspire to create a sense of unease. Sam's presence seemed to hang in the air like a heavy mystery we couldn't fathom. A few hours later, we pulled up to Memphis. Sam asked us to drop him off on a deserted, dimly lit street corner. He thanked us for the ride, then quickly got out of the car and disappeared into the shadows. Paul and I stared after him, both relieved and apprehensive. What had we just stumbled upon? As we continued our trek toward Tennessee, unanswered questions lingered. The dark, tree-lined road stretched seemingly endlessly, and a sense of unease never left us. Paul and I exchanged nervous glances. In the small college town of Everbrook, Miguel, a 19-year-old college student, had a sense of adventurism that often led him and his friends to intriguing antics. One chilly evening, they decided to head to the nearest casino, a well-known establishment where dreams were won and lost under neon lights. Miguel and his 5 friends piled into the car, which was already filled to the brim with exuberant souls ready to indulge in a night of excitement and fun. Their excitement could be felt as they drove through the winding roads and distant hills leading to the casino. Despite the alcohol and the casino's charms, they remained sober, determined to ensure their safe return home at the end of the night. The drive to the casino was long, and it took an hour and a half to reach their destination. The night passed in a whirlwind of laughter, card games, and the clinking of coins. The hours flew by as they enjoyed the casino atmosphere, testing their luck and hoping that fortune would smile upon them. As the clock approached midnight, Miguel and his friends decided to call it a night and started heading back to the hostel. Their pockets were light, but their spirits were high, and they loaded into the car and headed back. The return trip, however, took an unexpected turn. After only 10 minutes of driving, they found themselves on a deserted hillside where the road abruptly cut off. Headlights pierced the darkness, shrouding the car in an eerie light. A police car stopped behind them, flashing its red and blue headlights ominously. A stern-looking policeman in an unfamiliar uniform approached the car, casting an unsettling shadow over their group. Miguel rolled down his window, anxiety gnawing at him from the inside out, and he replied, "We're heading back to the dorm, officer. We've been to the casino, and it's time to call it a night." The officer nodded and said, "Next time, consider taking to cars. It will be safer for all of you that way." With those words, the mysterious figure disappeared into a police car, which immediately drove off, leaving Miguel and his friends in perplexed silence. As they continued on their way, climbing the hill where they had been stopped, the hostel appeared in the distance, only 3 minutes away. This was impossible. They should have been in Everbrook for at least an hour. There was a collective silence in the car as they pondered the inexplicable situation. Gradually understanding came to one of them, then another, and soon encompassed the entire group. A journey that should have taken an hour and a half, they traveled in only 13 minutes. Shocked by the inexplicable event, they parked the car in the dormitory parking lot and took refuge in one of the dorm rooms. There they could gather their thoughts and discuss what had happened in private. Tension hung in the dimly lit room. Each of the friends recounted the strange encounter with the mysterious officer and the surreal journey that followed. It soon became apparent that none of them could remember what the officer looked like. The badge, uniform color, gender, and even the officer's face had vanished from their shared memory. There was no paperwork, no records, nothing to refer to. It was as if they had been stopped by a phantom, an entity that left no trace behind but a deep sense of safety and protection that inexplicably enveloped them. There was an eerie silence in the room, broken only by quiet whispers and nervous glances. What had happened on that lonely slope? How had they ended up at such a great distance in a matter of minutes? And who was the mysterious officer who had stopped them? The questions remained unanswered, and the unknown remained, casting a shadow over the lives of Miguel and his friends for years to come. Something inexplicable happened that night, and it seemed as if someone or something had intervened to keep them safe from unknown danger.